Hi everyone, this is Kevin Annett, Eagle Strong Voice. It's July 15th, 2022. Today is the 10th anniversary of the launching of our International Common Law Court that deposed Pope Benedict and began really the whole common law movement around the world. And 30 years ago today, synchronistically, I first arrived on the west coast of Canada as a fledgling young United Church minister with my family and began a process that exposed the genocide in Canadian residential schools at a great personal loss, but at the same time a great triumph and victory over the years. So I thought it was appropriate today that I share with you a reflection. And you can see this online, including images and other things that I can't share on this, obviously. And that's found at republicofcanada.org under Breaking News. I call this reflection, Our 30 Years War and the Ending It Heralds, a Final Retrospective. Well, when I was a young boy growing up in Winnipeg, my relatives warned me never to talk to my severely alcoholic Uncle Earl about his World War II experiences. But being me, I did anyway, expecting him to recite stirring battlefield accounts that would fuel my 10-year-old ardor for war and soldiering. Well, instead, Uncle Earl said these words. It was a nightmare. My best friend Sandy got blown to pieces right next to me. But you know, it was the best time of my life because I was doing something that mattered. We laid our lives on the line for each other every day. Everything since then has been a lot of crap, just the same old dog-eat-dog world. Nobody gives a shit about what we did or what we went through. They'll never understand. You had to be there. Well, Earl's words rang in my heart and mind over the last few days as my own war memories began to return with a vengeance on the 30th anniversary of their commencement. On July 15th, 1992, a week after the birth of my youngest daughter, Eleanor, fate brought me to a United Church pulpit in a war zone called Port Alberni. From out of the tumultuous years that followed and ended my life, I would know the agony of every veteran, that a victory won at the cost of everything would never be appreciated by those for whom I struggled and bled. But like my Uncle Earl, I discovered the hidden secret in that pain, described by another war veteran, General Joshua Chamberlain of Gettysburg fame, who said, "It's only when a man supremely gives that he supremely finds." Well, nowadays the world barely remembers the extraordinary changes achieved over the past 30 years by just a handful of us. Changes that have shaken Canada and the world and its pinnacles of church and state and corporatocracy. These powers have done their best to bury that memory of their crime of mass murder of children and the horrific truth we revealed of an ongoing genocide that now threatens all of humanity. But the truth abides, as does the verdict against a murderous corporate culture whose time is over. And it all began 3 decades ago today, when my young family and I drove unsuspectingly into the Alberni Valley on Canada's west coast, and I began to meet survivors of the death camps people call Indian residential schools. Well, that story has been told in pieces over the years. It's, of course, been online for many years at murderbydecree.com. This represents the blood, sweat, and tears of some of us over those years. And while that story is told in small pieces here and there, the bigger panorama eludes our present 1-second memory culture. Not even our historic common law court trial that deposed Pope Benedict is recalled in official memory. But the victory remained. For the truth is that our initial campaign to expose the Canadian residential school massacres broadened over the subsequent quarter century into 3 equally successful movements that span the globe. Our common law court prosecution of Canada, Rome, and London for the Canadian genocide, the exposure of Vatican-led trafficking and ritual killing of children, and the establishment of sovereign common law republics to replace criminally convicted regimes like Canada, the British Crown, and the Vatican. Those 4 epic assaults on centuries-old tyrannies not only deposed a pope and papal crown authority, but popularized and made legitimate issues like the common law, religious child torture, and personal and political sovereignty. It also led us to confront an even deadlier and ultimate enemy, the present global corporatocracy and its extermination of our liberties and lives. But that latest struggle has illuminated an outcome and a fate that none of us ever expected. Well, the other night I sat and sorted through the 24 boxes whose priceless contents summarize the majority of my adult years. News clippings, faded documents, photos, excavated artifacts, and hundreds of eyewitness statements. In memory in those images, I saw long-dead friends defiantly picketing the Catholic, Anglican, and United churches that killed over 60,000 of their child relatives. I see government reports citing 50% death rates that span decades. Banal media and official acknowledgments of the truth known personally to so many survivors of our homegrown Holocaust. Small buttons off the uniforms of slaughtered children who were buried in secret. But I also see the happy smiles of my own young daughters from a time long past when innocence and naivety still had room in my life. Well, I was looking at all that, and I was suddenly struck with the incredulity I hadn't felt in many years. I thought, it's been 30 years. The truth has been known for that long, and yet still the world acts like nothing's happened, and even people who care do nothing about it. Still, this evidence is banned from our schools and libraries and official discourse. And I thought, how can these churches still be operating? How can we allow them to operate, knowing that they still traffic and kill children, and they have the blood of so many on their hands? How are people able to look the other way and live alongside that? And why am I still a banished and erased person, under permanent blacklisting in my own country, and so many witnesses and friends have been murdered and forgotten, while the child killers still walk free and hide their guilt? Well, I put it this way in my book, Fallen, the story of the Vancouver Four, which I urge you to read. It's a heartfelt account of all of this, about my friend Harry Wilson, William Coombs, Ricky O'Valley, and Bingo Dawson, all of whom were killed as a result of being involved in our campaign. And in this book, Fallen, I wrote, Harry Wilson had been the most helpless of the four, and watching him stumble and crumble every day and finally end up dead in a garbage dump was a final break for me. Nothing made sense to me after that, and everything was estranged. The moral equation was a simple one for me. If someone as innocent as Harry could be so easily ripped apart to his dying day, while his killers prospered and the world yawned, I couldn't have any part of it anymore. My mind eventually told me that, but first something visceral snapped in me. After Harry Wilson died, I lived only in the moments that mattered. Well, nowadays, I don't witness that kind of visceral disgust for our blood-soaked society from many people, including from the self-described awake ones. These folks spend a lot of time abstractly castigating the latest criminal acts of the system while continuing to dutifully pay their taxes and vote for that system. Over the decades while under the gun, I've learned to grow beyond such trite, limited Pavlovian responses. Because the issue for me isn't the criminality of those in power, but how they're enabled to be that way by the cooperation they receive from the rest of us, including the self-described awake ones. Over the past 30 years, get this, only 2 people have ever told me that they quit in protest one of these genocidal churches after seeing our evidence. 2 people over 30 years. Our church demonstrations and occupations never drew more than a few dozen people, most of them Aboriginals. And today, when we cite international law and call for the seizure and disestablishing of these criminally convicted churches and the arrest of their leaders, activists of every stripe fall back in fear, like abused children who are asked to confront their violent parent. Well, my analogy to fearful children isn't simple rhetoric. The more our campaigns move beyond merely talking about genocide, but confronting and prosecuting those responsible and disestablishing their authority with that of our own, the more we did that, the more people became confused and hostile. The reaction became most pronounced after we established local Republican assemblies and courts, and we began passing our own laws to oppose the so-called COVID regulations. In a word, people self-sabotaged that campaign. Well, significantly, this pattern has always played itself out in the same way everywhere. After showing great enthusiasm for work or for the assembly, participants hesitate when they're asked to pass and enforce their own laws. Most of them then either drop away or find reasons not to be involved, including by blaming and attacking me for something. In some cases, people even turn informant for the RCMP and actively disrupt and smear our efforts. Yesterday's allies become overnight enemies. Well, of course, I've witnessed that kind of rapid turnabout before, many times, among Indian residential school survivors whose Stockholm Syndrome causes many of them to minimize their pain or even defend their own torture and refrain from accusing their tormentors. One astute observer who was involved in these healing circles said, "The Indians act like they're the ones being attacked when we confront the churches." Well, psychological explanations for people identifying with their oppressors and the resulting flip-flop in their loyalties, those explanations only go so far. A deeper, less visible, and more insidious manipulation is at work, whether among Aboriginal survivors or Republic Assembly participants. Among these people, all of them, I learned that anyone still attached to a criminal system and its group mind are incapable of seriously fighting it, because it owns them. And that revelation was like the moment when I conducted an exorcism outside the Vatican in October 2009, and a tornado struck Rome the next morning. I realized that our battle is indeed a profoundly spiritual one that's challenging the real controlling entity behind the throne of matter and appearances. Well, a young man called Mark Angus warned me about this. He was a diminutive member of my Port Alberni congregation who worked with me actively in the food bank and helping people, and one day he was found dead in his hotel room. Soon after, he had begun speaking from our pulpit about local child and drug trafficking. But before he died, Mark told me that this evil thing responsible for the residential school genocide was hiding in the churches, and that it hated me for pulling back its mask. He told me that I'd be alone in this fight, that everyone would betray and abandon me, even my own wife, and that the only one who would be on my side to the end was God. Well, you know, Mark's words proved truer than anything that's ever been spoken to me, because all of that came true. The mask of this bloody thing that we've all served has indeed slipped enough for even the dullest person to see what lies behind it, if they choose to see. But as I've experienced and is described in the Bible in the 6th chapter of the book of Isaiah, people have eyes, but they don't see. They have ears, but they don't hear. They have hearts that have grown fat. Because otherwise, says Scripture, they might change and be saved. And that deliverance from ourselves is something that history or fate or God is not allowing to happen. Just look around. Well, is it not undeniable that we've refused our chance to be different by being changed by the horror done to the innocent in our name with our money? We could have stopped child murder and the encroaching corporate COVID tyranny years ago, but we chose instead to look the other way and live off the fruits of genocide as we suckled at the Moloch monster that is devouring our children and many children. And so now a judgment is upon us, a real judgment, not from a vengeful deity, but due to the consequences of our own choices and our complicity. Our society is not meant to survive itself, nor is any part of ourselves meant to survive that belongs to it, because our group crime is too massive, too ongoing, and its lies are too entrenched for any of it to end peacefully or rightly. This understanding is one of the few gifts that have been given to me over the last 30 years of unrequited struggle and suffering, and it's a crucial lamp to follow in the dark times that we're in during these final days. Without such inner insight, we cannot navigate the present madness. And so when people demand to know from me how Pope Francis will be stopped when he comes to Canada on July 23rd in order to parley with the Chinese and harm more children, I ask them if his arrest will change the judgment descending on all of us. We're told that not a single just soul was found anywhere in the doomed city of Sodom before its final destruction. Well, who then was the enemy in Sodom? And who is the cause of their own downfall? The answer is everyone. And so to find the real enemy, all they Sodomites had to do and all we have to do is to look in the mirror. Well, that said, nature's law shows that for individuals, as for entire cultures, death comes so that new life can begin. Today's global power struggle between a Vatican-financed resurgent China and a collapsing America is but a passing moment in the death knell that has been sounded for the governing corporatocracy that rules the world for now. In the shadow of that dinosaur lingers those of us who are to embody a new society in the shell of the old. And the hard-won lessons like those of the past 3 decades will inspire and lead those of us who may achieve the liberty and justice of a godly people within their own republics. Well, years ago in a pub in Liverpool, England, I spoke to a group of survivors of church torture who were very much like my Aboriginal friends. At the break, an elderly woman approached me. She said quietly, "I've been trying to figure you out for years, Kevin, and now I think I finally understand you." She paused and smiled and said, "You were sent here to uproot and tear down the old so that the new can grow. You're a system smasher." Well, I nodded at the simple truth she had nailed so precisely. And then she took my hand and said with tears in her eyes, "And your Indian friends, they knew that about you too. And that's why they stood by you to the very end." In the only photograph I have of Harry Wilson and me, taken a few years before his murder, the little tortured man smiles awkwardly as he drapes his arm over my shoulder. Something undying stares out from him. That undying spark that helps sustain my own fire through the 10,000 days that together we battled Goliath. Well, that spark lives on, friends. That light honors all of the fallen, as well as the past 30 years and all that we've accomplished, and all that we've lost. And it honors whatever is to come in the days and the years ahead. May that light enliven all of us and make us restless fighters for the new world. A fight that is ongoing and requires that each of you step up to the plate. And ending with the words of General Joshua Chamberlain when he visited the Gettysburg battlefield 50 years after that struggle, he said, "For darkness crept up until from all earthly sight I was buried with those before. But oh, what radiant companionship rose around, what bearing of heroic souls. The glory of living through those days and nights of battle nobody will ever know. But that which lifts up such splendid valor and drank in such high heart's blood shall hold the mighty secret in its bosom till the great day of revelation and recompense." Carry it on, friends. This is Kevin Annett, Eagle Strong Voice, murderbydecree.com, republicofcanada.org. Stand by.